Wyoming Territory, May 1887. The wind howled low across the plains outside Laramie, dragging dust across the wagon ruts and pressing cold rain into the skin like grit. It was past midnight when Florence McAllister stepped off the road, her boots sinking into the wet grass, her arms aching from the weight of the canvas sack slung over her shoulder. Everything she owned was in that sack. A folded quilt, 2 dresses, a tin box with her wedding ring, and a Bible with pages going soft at the edges. Her husband, William, had been buried the week before under a cottonwood tree in Cheyenne. Pneumonia took him fast. The doctor never did come. Now Florence was walking toward nowhere, soaked to the bone, with no more than $3 sewn into her hem. Her boy, Jesse, only 6, slept against her back in a sling she had stitched from an old bedsheet. Her daughter, Josie, 8, was holding her hand, quiet and brave, though her lips trembled. "Mama, are we almost there?" Josie asked, her small voice barely rising over the wind. Florence didn't know how to answer that. She just gave Josie's hand a squeeze and said, "We are getting close." To what, she wasn't sure. She had heard of work in Laramie cleaning rooms at a boarding house, maybe sewing if they needed it, but they were still a half-day's walk out. The last farm they passed turned her away. Said they had no room, said she should try the railroad camps. She would not. She had seen what happened to women alone in those places. The rain came harder. Florence pulled Josie beneath a stand of thin pines and set down her sack, trying to shield both children with her shawl. She could barely feel her fingers. Then she heard hooves. She stood fast, heart in her throat. A rider came through the dark on a thin mare, ribs showing, saddle patched with rope and canvas. He wore a wide-brimmed hat soaked through, and a threadbare duster clung to his lean frame. The horse halted when he saw her. "Ma'am," his voice was deep, rough from the cold. "You all right?" Florence did not move. "We're just resting." He looked down at the children, then back at her. His eyes were dark, steady. "You walking all this way in the rain?" "We do not need help," she said quickly. He swung down from his horse anyway, holding out his hands. "I am not here to harm you. I am just a man who saw a woman with 2 kids standing in the pine trees in the middle of a storm." Florence looked him over. He was young, maybe 30, but a hard life had carved lines into his face. His boots were worn through almost to the sole. His hands were calloused. There was nothing on his belt but a rusty knife. She hesitated, then said, "I am Florence McAllister. My husband died last week." "We are on our way to Laramie," he nodded once. "I am August Monroe." He glanced up at the sky. "There is an old barn just down the slope. Roof leaks, but it is dry enough for tonight." She looked at her children. Josie was shivering now, and Jesse stirred in his sleep, whimpering. She met August's eyes again. "Lead the way." He walked beside them, guiding his mare with a rope. They followed the slope down, and sure enough, beneath a crooked cottonwood, there stood a sagging barn. The door hung half off the hinges, but the inside was dry. Florence laid the children on a pile of straw while August lit a small fire in a rusted tin bucket. He handed her his coat. She tried to refuse. He just said, "Take it, I will be fine." When the children were finally asleep, Florence sat beside the fire, her shoulders tight. "You are kind," she said, "but you do not look much richer than me." August gave a tired laugh. "I am not, lost my claim near Rawlins last fall. Frost took the last of my herd, been riding fence and hauling freight since." "You sleeping out here too?" she asked. He nodded. Barn was better than the ditch. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire flickering low. The rain tapped against the roof like a steady drumbeat. Florence drew in a breath. "Thank you for stopping." He looked at her then, really looked. "You were carrying everything you own, in the rain." "With 2 children, that is not something a man rides past." She swallowed hard. No one had said anything kind to her in a long while. "You got someone waiting in Laramie?" he asked. "No," she said. "Just an idea of work, maybe a room if I can find one." He nodded slowly. "Well, I do not got much, but I got hands that work, and I do not mind giving them." She met his eyes. "Why?" "Because you needed a place to rest, and I needed to remember I still got a heart." That night, while the storm raged outside, Florence watched him feed sticks to the fire and whisper a song to keep the children calm in their sleep. Something quiet and low. The way he sat, careful not to touch anything that was not his. The way he glanced toward her but never stared. She felt something inside her break open some corner that had gone cold in the weeks since William died. She spoke first. "You ever been married?" "No," he said. "Never had the means." Florence nodded. "William was good, but the sickness came fast. I could not stop it." "I am sorry," August said, his voice soft. She nodded again, then looked down at her hands. "You are the first person who has not looked at me like I was someone else's burden." He looked at her, his eyes warm in the firelight. "You are not a burden. You are brave." She blinked fast, then looked away. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. He pulled his saddlebag near and took out a dry biscuit, broke it in half. He offered her a piece. She took it. They ate in silence. And when the fire burned low and they lay down on opposite sides of the children, Florence listened to the steady sound of his breathing and felt safer than she had in weeks. When dawn broke over the plains, the rain had stopped. Florence sat up to see her children still asleep, tangled in the quilt. August was outside, brushing his mare with his bare hands, whispering to her like she was made of glass. Florence stepped out of the barn and wrapped the shawl tight around her. "You planning to ride on?" He looked over. "Not unless you are," she hesitated. "I do not have a plan past Laramie," he smiled faintly. "Then maybe we make one together." Florence did not answer right away, but something in her chest felt warmer now. Not just because the sky had cleared, but because a man with nothing had shared what little he had. And he had done it without asking for anything in return. She walked to him and held out her hand. "All right, together." He took it. And for the first time in a long while, Florence McAllister felt like the road ahead did not belong to sorrow alone. The road into Laramie wound through low hills, dotted with sage and early wildflowers. The pale green of new spring brushing up against the red Wyoming earth. Florence walked with Josie's hand in hers while Jessie rode in August's arms, dozing against his chest. August had tied his mare's reins loosely around his wrist, letting the tired creature amble beside them. They reached the edge of town by late afternoon. The buildings rose up plain and close together weathered timber-fronted shops, 2 saloons, a church with a tilted steeple. Smoke lifted from chimneys, and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang faintly through the air. Florence glanced at August. "You know anyone here?" He shifted Jessie gently in his arms. "I hauled freight for a man named Harlan Reese last winter. He owns a livery off Grand Avenue." He paused. "Might be a bunkhouse out back if it hasn't burned down." Florence nodded. "I was told there's a boarding house near the depot. I'll walk you there first. I can go alone." "I know." August looked down at Jessie, still sleeping against his shoulder. "But I figure we're not done walking together just yet." The boarding house stood behind the rail yard, a 2-story clapboard building with curtains in the windows and a crooked sign that read, "Madam Holt's Lodgings." A boy about Josie's age was sweeping the porch, and a thin woman with a broad face and gray-streaked braid leaned in the doorway, watching them approach. Florence stepped forward. "Ma'am, I was told you might be needing help." The woman studied her. "You sew?" Florence nodded. "I clean too and cook." The woman's gaze drifted to the children. "No menfolk," my husband passed. "You got money for a room?" Florence's fingers brushed the stitched hem of her skirt. "Enough for a few days." The woman looked over at August standing quietly beside the mare. "He yours?" Florence looked back at him. "No." "But he's kind." The woman nodded once. "You can have the attic. It's hot in summer and freezes in winter, but it's dry. There's a cot and a basin. You clean the dining room and help with laundry, and I'll let you stay." "I'll do it." The woman motioned toward the door. "Bring the children in." "I'll show you up." August stepped forward, still holding Jessie. "I'll carry him up for you." Florence hesitated, then nodded. The attic was small, the ceiling sloped and low, but the cot was clean and the window open to the sound of trains in the distance. August laid Jessie gently on the cot. Josie stood beside the basin, running her fingers along the porcelain edge. Florence turned to him. "Thank you for getting us here." He looked around the attic, then back at her. "You want me to check on Harlan, see if he can use another hand, if you'd like." He pulled his hat low. "I'll come back before sundown. If I don't, it means I caught on and they've got me sleeping in the hay." Florence gave the faintest nod. "Be safe." He paused at the stairs. "I will." Later that evening, she sat by the attic window, watching the last of the daylight stretch across the rooftops. Josie had fallen asleep curled against Jessie, their breathing soft and even. Florence's hands were raw from scrubbing the dining room floor, but she didn't mind. She had done harder work for less. She heard boots on the stairs before she saw him. August ducked under the low beam and stepped inside, dust on his sleeves and a smear of grease near his collar. "Harlan remembered me, said I could start tomorrow. He's got me sleeping in the stable loft." Florence nodded. "That's good." He leaned against the frame of the window. "You settle in all right. I've had worse." They stood in quiet for a moment. Then August reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded square of cloth. He held it out to her. "I stopped by the mercantile, thought the little one might like this." She unfolded it. A child's kerchief, faded red with a stitched border. "Not new but clean." "She will," Florence said softly. August looked down at his boots. "I know he's not mine, but I carried him today and he felt like he could have been." Florence's breath caught just for a second. "You don't have to say things like that." "I'm not saying it because I have to." She looked at him then. Under the soot and the tired, his eyes were steady, not asking anything, just offering what he had. "I'll be working mornings and evenings," she said. "There's a stove downstairs. The woman said I could cook if I wanted. I can bring flour and salt when I get paid." Florence smiled faintly. "Then I'll make biscuits." He nodded once. "I'd like that." He turned to leave, but she stepped forward and touched his wrist, just a brush of her fingers, light as breath. "August." He stopped. She looked at the children, then back at him. "You don't need to sleep in a loft if there's warmth here." His mouth parted, but he said nothing. Florence let go of his wrist. "Not yet, but just know it's not closed to you." He met her eyes. "I'll wait." She watched him descend the stairs, the boards creaking under his step. When the silence settled again, she sat at the window and watched the stars come out one by one. The sky was clear, and for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to break. She was waiting for something to begin. By the second week, the rhythm of life in Laramie settled into something near to steady. The boarding house creaked under the weight of old lumber and new footsteps. Florence rose before the sun, washed in cold water, and ironed linens with a brick heated on the stove. Josie helped fold cloth napkins while Jessie played with marbles made from worn-down buttons. August came by in the evenings, smelling of hay and horses, with dirt under his nails and a weariness that clung to his shoulders. He never came empty-handed. One night it was a tin of lard, another time a shirt too small for him that fit Jessie just right. He'd sit by the attic window while Florence mended socks and Josie braided her doll's hair. "You ever been west of here?" Florence asked one evening, threading her needle through a collar seam. August leaned his elbows on the sill. "Once. Went as far as Evanston. Thought I might hire on with the rail crew, but I didn't take to it." "Why not?" he shrugged. "Too many men who didn't care if they lived through the week." Florence set the shirt aside. "You ever want to leave Wyoming?" "Not anymore," he said. "There's enough land here to make a life if a man's patient." She looked at him then. "You still believe in that?" He turned his head, eyes steady. "I believe in what I see." Jessie stirred in his sleep, and Florence rose to settle him, brushing a hand over his brow. When she sat again, she didn't pick up the sewing. "You see anything in me worth believing in?" she asked, her voice low. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You hold your children like they're the last soft thing in the world. That's worth something." She drew her knees to her chest, resting her chin there. "I don't always feel strong." He looked out into the dark. "Doesn't mean you ain't." The next morning, while she scrubbed the porch steps of the boarding house, a man in a brown wool coat stopped at the gate. He carried a satchel and wore a badge pinned to his chest. You Florence McAllister? He asked. She stood, straightening her skirt. Yes, I'm Marshall Hendricks, got a wire from Cheyenne. There's a man saying he's kin to your late husband. Claims he's coming to collect your boy. Florence's mouth went dry. He never had brothers, only a cousin in St. Louis, the marshal frowned. This one's from Denver, said he's your husband's uncle. That man never once wrote or came to the wedding. He's no father to Jessie. He's due in town come Friday, she gripped the railing. I won't let him take my son. I'm just passing word. If you got reason to contest, you'll need to speak with the judge. August found her in the washroom, wringing out linens with raw hands, her jaw set tight. She didn't look up when he entered. What happened? He asked. She kept working. A man's coming, claims he's kin by marriage, says Jessie belongs to him now. August stepped closer. He doesn't. She wrung the last sheet and dropped it into the basket. He could take him if he convinces the judge. I've got no deed, no savings, no house. You've got 2 children and a name, that's more than he has. She turned to him, voice shaking. If I lose either of them, I'm nothing. He reached out but didn't touch her. Then we don't let that happen. How? I'll speak with Harlan. He knows the judge's clerk. Maybe he can vouch for you. She wiped her hands on her apron. Why would he do that for me? August's voice was quiet. Because I'll ask him as a man who's standing with you. She stared at him. That's not a small thing. He met her gaze. I'm not a small man. Later that day, Florence stitched a seam with a steadier hand. Josie sat nearby, humming to herself, her doll cradled in her lap. Jessie traced shapes in the dust on the floor. August returned after sunset. He carried a folded paper and a bruise along his jaw. Florence stood. What happened to you? Harlan took some convincing, he said, touching the side of his face. But he wrote a statement, said you're steady, honest, and working under his roof. Judge'll trust his word. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. You didn't have to fight for this. I know, he said, but you're not standing alone. That night she walked with him down the stairwell, her shawl wrapped tight, the chill air brushing her cheek. They stood by the livery's fence, the lantern swinging gently in the breeze. She looked up at him. Most men wouldn't have lifted a finger. You nearly broke your jaw. He smiled through the ache. I've taken worse hits for less important things. She stepped closer. You're not just helping me. I know. She reached up, fingers brushing his shoulder. You're part of us now, whether you meant to be or not. His voice was rough. I meant to. Florence nodded, her eyes bright beneath the moonlight. Then don't sleep in the loft anymore. He didn't speak, just folded his hand around hers, warm and calloused. She didn't pull away. Back in the attic, the children slept soundly. Florence sat beside them, August by the window. The wind whispered against the glass. Neither of them said anything more that night. They didn't need to. What passed between them was quiet and sure and already taking root. The courthouse sat on a rise just north of town. Whitewashed boards faded to a dull gray, its bell tower leaning slightly to the west. Florence stood on the steps with Jessie's hand tucked in hers and Josie beside them, her hair tied back with a ribbon August had brought home 2 nights before. The morning sun was sharp and high, casting long shadows across the packed earth of the street. Inside, the judge wore wire-rimmed spectacles and a fraying collar. He read Harlan's letter twice before glancing at Florence. You live at Madame Holt's? Yes, sir, Florence said, keeping her voice level. She's a hard woman to please. I get by. The judge tapped the edge of the statement with a calloused finger. And this man, Monroe, he isn't kin. No, sir. But he's taken to your children. Florence kept her eyes on him. He's taken to all of us. The judge didn't smile, didn't look up from his desk. Denver man's petition doesn't hold water with me. No proof of blood, no witness to any claim. He never met the boy. He folded the letter, slow and precise. Your children stay with you. That's my ruling. Florence said nothing. She nodded once tightly and gathered her children's hands before stepping out into the light. They passed August waiting by the rail yard, his hands in his coat pockets, back against the fence. She didn't speak until they were near enough for him to see Jessie's grin and Josie's quiet relief. He won't be coming back, she said. It's done. August exhaled once. Good. Florence glanced toward the depot. Come with us. I want to show them something. They walked past the freight house and around a bend in the tracks where a thin stretch of land opened between the rails and the river. Cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves just beginning to thicken, and a narrow footpath cut through the grass, leading to a rise above the water. At the hilltop, Florence stopped. The land below dipped into a hollow scattered with bluebells and dry brush. A small, leaning fence marked the edge of a long-forgotten grazing field. She turned to August. This was my husband's cousin's land. He died 2 years back. No will, but no one claimed it. It's gone untouched since. August stepped forward, eyes sweeping the low ground. You've thought about it, Florence nodded. I have. You want to stay in Laramie? I want a piece of earth that's ours. Somewhere the children can plant something and watch it grow. August crouched, picked up a stone, turned it in his palm. Soil's dry, but the river's close. Florence watched him. If I could get the deed, I'd need someone who knows how to build a fence, mend a roof. He stood, brushing his hand on his thigh. I can do both and more. She stepped closer, her voice softer. I don't have anything to offer but what's already here. August looked at her, sunlight catching the edges of his unshaven jaw. You think that's not enough? Florence looked down, then back up. I think I'm tired of waiting for someone to tell me what I'm worth. You're worth more than you know, he said. And not because of what you've lost, because of what you haven't let go of. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Will you build it with me? August didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. Yes, I'll build it with you. Josie tugged her mother's sleeve. Are we going to live here? Florence knelt beside her. Not yet, but soon. We'll start clearing it before the frost comes back. Jesse clapped his hands. Can we have a goat? August laughed, low and rough. If we can find one that doesn't eat the fence. The children ran down the hill, chasing each other through the tall grass. Florence and August stood side by side, the river murmuring below. She reached for his hand. He took it, not like he was asking for anything, just holding it. They stayed like that a long while, the wind brushing past, the land before them quiet and wide and ready. The small parcel of land just east of the river bloomed slowly under steady hands. August cleared brush with a borrowed axe, while Florence planned which seeds would go in first and how best to stretch the cloth she'd saved for curtains. The children gathered pebbles to line the path from what would be their door to the water's edge, their laughter winding through the tall grass like wind through wheat. By late June, the foundation for the cabin had been staked out. August hauled timber from a mill north of town, bartering his labor for cut boards and hand-forged nails. He returned each evening with splinters in his palms and a quiet look that met Florence's eyes before he even spoke. She had taken to boiling water at dusk and soaking his hands with cloth steeped in chamomile and pine resin. You ever think about what it'll look like? She asked one night while she rapped his knuckles, her fingers quick and sure. I see it, he said. One room, warm even when the snow hits. A loft for the children, a stove with a kettle always on. Florence tilted her head. And what else? A porch that catches morning light, a fence that holds strong through wind, your chair beside mine. She dipped the cloth again, not answering right away. Then quietly, You've thought about this longer than I have, haven't you? His voice was low. I started building it the night I saw you in the rain. By the time the roof beams were raised, word of their efforts had spread through the edge of Laramie. The boarding house cook gave them a sack of dried beans, and the clerk at the mercantile offered August a set of dull chisels he no longer used. Even Madame Holt, never known for generosity, slipped Florence a bundle of leftover muslin with the words, "For curtains." Children ought to wake to light. Josie helped Florence sew those curtains, her stitches uneven but earnest. Jessie took to following August like a shadow, watching each hammer swing with wide eyes. "You think he'll be good with tools?" Florence asked one morning while they watched from a distance. August adjusted the brace he'd built to hold the planks in place. "He's got the patience for it, that's what matters." Florence glanced toward the trees. "And Josie, she's quiet lately. She watches everything. She sees more than she says." He met her gaze. "Like you." They built through July's heat, pausing only when the midday sun made the ground shimmer. On those days, Florence brought cold water in a tin pail, and they sat beneath the cottonwoods while the children played near the riverbank, their feet dark with mud. "Would you have done this alone?" she asked him once, their backs against the bark, his arm resting lightly beside hers. "No," he said. "I wouldn't have seen the point in it." "Not without you." She reached for his hand then, not out of hesitation but the kind of knowing that grows over time like roots beneath the soil. By mid-August, the cabin stood complete. One room, low-roofed, with a narrow loft and a stove that still smoked some on windy days. The floorboards creaked in places and the window hinges stuck, but it was theirs. Florence lined the shelf with dried herbs, and Josie arranged wildflowers in a chipped jar beside the bed. Jessie placed a pine cone on the sill and declared it lucky. They moved in on a Sunday. Florence spent the morning sweeping the last of the dust from the corners while August hitched the mare and brought their things from town. The children rode in the wagon, Jessie holding tight to his button marbles, Josie clutching her doll with the mended dress. That evening, Florence lit the oil lamp and stood at the doorway, watching the sun fall behind the hills. August stepped beside her, his shirt damp with work, his eyes tracing the horizon. "It's not much," he said. She turned to him. "It's everything." They sat on the porch as the sky turned violet. Josie and Jessie dozed inside, curled together on the mattress. Florence leaned against August's shoulder, her fingers laced with his. "You still thinking about the road west?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm thinking about winter wheat and how many nails I've got left in the tin." She smiled. "I can help with the wheat. I've done it before. I know, that's why I asked you to build it with me." The crickets sang low in the brush and the river murmured beyond the trees. Florence shifted, resting her head against his chest. "I never thought life would begin again this late," she whispered. "It didn't begin again," he said. "It just started where it was meant to." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "I love you." He kissed her then, slow and sure, like every moment had been building to it. When they parted, he said, "And I love you, with all I've got." They sat like that until the lantern burned low, the porch cooled by night air, the cabin behind them quiet and full. Years passed. The wheat grew tall come spring. Josie learned to read by firelight, and Jessie built his own tools from scraps of wood and nail. The mare grew old and was buried beneath the cottonwood tree. A new foal took her place, born on a warm April morning while Florence held the reins and August whispered to the mother. Neighbors came to call. A woman named Ruth brought preserves in jars. A widower from the north fence helped dig a well. The land gave more each year, and the house grew first a second room, then a lean-to for storage, and finally a porch swing that creaked when the wind was right. On their 10th harvest, Florence stood in the doorway once again, watching August return from the field with Jessie beside him and Josie bringing up the rear, her braid long and trailing behind her. The sunlight caught in their hair and clothes, and the cabin stood behind her, sturdy and weathered, the curtains still white. She stepped out as August reached the porch. He leaned his forehead to hers, sweat on his brow, love in his eyes. "We did it," she said. "We did." They walked inside together, the door closing behind them with a gentle click, and the warm scent of bread and wheat and years well lived settled around them like a second skin. And for the rest of their days, Florence and August Monroe lived in the house they built together, with love earned, peace kept, and nothing left wanting.